It's time for the Your Personal Bank Show with Ferenc Toth. In an era of chaos, confusion, and craziness, Ferenc is a voice for common sense. As a financial literacy educator, speaker, and entrepreneur, Ferenc cuts through the noise to help us understand how current events affect our money, economy, and our freedom. Now, here's Ferenc Toth.
Welcome to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ferenc. I know we're going into the holiday season, and this is a time that I normally really enjoy focusing on the Christmas music and the time with family and loved ones. And I just love the whole holiday season. This is a time of year where I like to reflect on the past year and think about next year and recharge the batteries, set new goals, all those types of things. I typically tend to disconnect from the news of the day. And I understand why people do that. We all need to recharge our batteries sometimes. But unfortunately, some things have happened recently that just cannot be ignored. So I'm going to cover these. I'm going to discuss it. And the first of those things, which I believe is the most important, is the Biden administration recently has authorized Ukraine to use U.S. long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. Russian President Putin has stated that such escalations would be considered an act of war, as he stated very consistently and repeatedly that if a nuclear power like the United States assisted Ukraine in its efforts to fire missiles into their territory, he would consider that an act of war, and I believe rightly so. This is a dangerous and unnecessary escalation of a war that's likely going to be wound down soon. Why I believe that to be the case. The problem is this is completely reckless, and it's counting on restraint from a dictator, Putin. If you remember with the early stages of this war, we were told by our own government that Putin was crazy, he was dangerous. I agree with the dangerous part. There's nothing to suggest he's out of his mind or crazy. He's a very intelligent, astute person. I do not agree necessarily with his thought processes or actions, but he's far from crazy. He's very calculating and very intelligent leader of his country. He has stated repeatedly that an attack by these missiles would constitute an act of war. And put yourself in Russia's shoes for a minute. Let's assume for a minute that a neighboring country, Mexico, for example, on our border, started shooting Russian-made long-range missiles into U.S. territory. That would be an equivalent. How do you think Americans would respond to that? How do you think our country would respond to that type of effort, knowing that Mexico did not have the technology for those types of missiles, yet Russia did, and Russia directly was responsible for assisting them in authorized it and gave them the missiles and then fired them into our country. That is the equivalent, folks. I don't care about who's right or wrong here. You're playing with a nuclear power. The one nuclear power in the world, Russia, that has more nukes than we do. An error, a mistake. One nuclear weapon going off, even by accident, could literally kill millions of people. It could lead to a Holocaust that's unimaginable. And I'm just really shocked at how little people have responded to this dangerous and unprecedented escalation. Now, the one saving grace, I believe, in my opinion, is that Trump was elected. He's the president-elect. He has stated he will end this war. Putin understands this. Putin's worked with Trump before. And I believe this is the one saving grace that potentially is the reason why we're not already engaged in a hot war with Russia. There are no winners in that type of war. That's the thing people need to understand. The Trump team has announced a peace envoy to assist in negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Now look, at this point of the war, Ukraine has experienced devastating casualties, loss of territory, and all types of things. And although Putin You can think what you want about Putin and whether he should have attacked Ukraine or not, whether he was provoked. Many people believe that was the case. But a good result, a favorable result that Ukraine could have had a couple of years ago in the very early stages of the war, that it's clearly come out the United States and England pushed Zelensky's hand and pushed him into continuing this war because we wanted it, or our military industrial complex wanted it. The Americans didn't, the average American didn't, but our military industrial complex did. It's hard to comprehend why somebody would escalate a potential war like this when they're on their way out of power. Everyone understands Biden's not making the decisions. He's not really in charge. Some people think it's Secretary Blinken and others, but I believe it has more to do with politics than being angry because Trump won the election. They're going to be out of power soon, and trying to hand Trump a terrible situation. The funny thing is, giving Trump a tremendous opportunity, if he can stop this war on somewhat favorable situation, he could also get a lot of credit for it. So it's ironic that what they're trying to turn into something likely very bad could end up being very good. Again, I'm very thankful that Trump was elected because I firmly believe we would likely be facing a hot war with Russia, which could lead to World War III. That's how big of a deal this is. You know, this is a money-focused show, and we talk about the economy and money and all these types of things, but there are things in this world that are far more important than money. And if you want to worry about your stock market portfolio, for example, try a hot war with Russia, see what happens there. Our economy could get real ugly real fast if something along that line happened, or China or anything like that. So this is not funny. This is not games. This is literally, potentially millions of lives that are being threatened potentially. And literally, it's upon the good graces of Putin to restrict his response. To give you an idea how far out of crazy and out of control our current administration is, we're counting on Putin to be the adult in the room, the one that has the calmer heads. And I pray to God that that is exactly what happens. That's a dangerous thing to count on. But at this point, that's all we have until Trump gets into office. And hopefully that's enough to avoid a catastrophic escalation of this war. And most ideally, it just ends soon, sooner than later, because far too many people have already died on both sides. They're Ukrainians and Russians are human beings too. And why it's so important what the United States does is in 2023, the NATO budget, 71% of the NATO budget was paid for by the United States. The next closest was Germany at 5.7%. We contribute 71% of NATO budget. Why? I understand being a partner, but who is far more at risk in NATO than the United States? And that's any of the European countries. And I firmly agree with Trump's attitude that they need to pay their fair share. The agreement with NATO is 2% of GDP of each country. Each of those countries need to be pulling their weight. And why do we have to be contributing far? I understand we're a far bigger country. I get all that. But really, why do we have to pay far more than 50%? I think it should be capped at least the most generous. We should not have to be contributing more than half, and the rest of Europe does the other half. I think that would be at the very least, be somewhat fair. And you wonder why people, we've had time to think about, there's a lot of reasons why I believe Trump won the election. One of them might just be the people of East Palestine and Maui and North Carolina and Florida got $700 from FEMA if they qualified, yet Ukraine got over $200 billion. Think about that for a little bit. And this is just embarrassing. The State Department has spent taxpayer-funded crying sessions for State Department employees after Trump's election victory. You want to talk about people that are out of touch with the American people, that they have to fund. Our taxpayer money has to pay for State Department employees to cry? Wow, that's out of touch. And here's another good one. From 2001 to 2003, Nearly 6,000 IRS workers owe a total of about $50 million in back taxes, yet they're the ones that are coming after the rest of us for taxes. They have the ability to fire them, but so far only about 20 have been fired. These are the people coming after us for taxes. Clean up your own house first, in my opinion. And even better, I'm going to discuss more about the tariffs that Trump is discussing. And there is some good and bad side to it. We're going to discuss both sides of it, but I'm firmly in favor of it for a number of reasons. But before I get to that, again, wondering why Trump won. Over the last several years, the Department of Defense spent over $15 million providing gender affirming care to over 1,800 service members. This is for service members to join the military and then change their sex. When did we ever agree to pay for service members surgeries for changing their sexual orientation? Where is that in the Constitution? And where did the American public, the majority of the American people, ever authorize that spending? And then the big one is the Pentagon has now failed its 7th audit in a row. This past year, it's unable to fully account for its $824 billion budget. And when you add up all those years, the Pentagon actually has a $35 trillion black hole in their budget. Ironically, as soon as Trump got elected, the Pentagon ordered a paper shredder truck. Gee, I wonder why. It just makes you wonder about some of those things, doesn't it? Look, I'm really excited about the future direction of this country, but there are some really serious problems that need to be addressed and taken care of. And there will be some bumps in the road and some adjustments that are going to happen through that process. We're going to discuss how to navigate that. One of those ways is to diversify and have a portion of your portfolio guaranteed safe, insured, tax-free, highly liquid, so your money can grow regardless of what the economy or markets do, or at least a portion of it. And when we do have a correction, and again, I repeat, when, it's not if, but when. Can't say when, how long, or how far, but certainly it will happen. It always does. You're protecting a portion of your portfolio. And if it's highly liquid, you can actually then take advantage of opportunities when they occur. And those opportunities will occur when we have a correction. There's no question about that. So if you want more information, contact me at yourpersonalbank.com. Stay tuned in the next segment. I got a lot more information to share I think you're going to find extremely interesting.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to contact me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you will reach me. Again, it's yourpersonalbank.com. So one last thought about Ukraine. Interestingly, a former Polish minister has come out publicly and stated at least half of U.S. aid was laundered by Ukrainians and much was given to the Democrats. And he uses a number of specific examples of, in March of 2022, the wife of a former Ukrainian MP had declared $28 million when entering Hungary. Where did all that money come from? And she's not the only one. Another Ukrainian diplomat was caught trying to flee Ukraine with hundreds of thousands of dollars and euros and gold jewelry, etc. And as his point was, he was stating, our tax dollars at work were making many corrupt Ukrainian politicians rich. Now, this is not a surprise to anyone who's paid attention. Ukraine has been famously known as one of the most corrupt countries in the world for decades now. And it just makes you wonder why so many, for example, Democrat lawmakers were waving Ukrainian flags on the House floor and many rhinos. Why do they keep sending money to Ukraine? I don't have any inside information on this. I have some distant relatives that live in Western Ukraine, and I'm half Hungarian. I've got some on both sides of the border. So I have some inside information on what's happening. But as far as the likely fraud, in my opinion, going on, this is no surprise. It's basic common sense. Why would, again, as I stated earlier, many of our lawmakers, literally nearly every Democrat and about half of the Republicans, the rhinos as we often refer to them, consistently voted and supported additional funding to Ukraine while ignoring our own border and other needs of the United States? Frankly, there just had to be some benefit in it for them. I've always stated, if you want to understand something, just follow the money. And as this Ukrainian or Polish foreign minister, I'm sorry, is stating, much of that was being laundered in Ukraine and sent back to many Democratic lawmakers. In fact, he even points out and states that both Schumer and McConnell were each given $15 million by Zelensky, by the Ukrainian government. Again, I have no way of knowing these things to be true or not, but it makes logical sense. It just makes common sense that fraud, money laundering, benefits were occurring. They were coming back to these lawmakers. Certainly, the military industrial complex was in favor of this war. They make money making military equipment and bombs and etc. There's a lot of money in war. That's not rocket science. It's just common sense. A lot of money is spent in war. Peace is not nearly as profitable for many of these people, whether it be folks in the military industrial complex, as President Eisenhower himself warned against. Yes, you have economic relations and trade and things like that, but it's far less profitable than war. And the fact that so many people still can't see that is shocking to me. Now, again, I have renewed faith in the American public because the majority, for whatever reason, voted for Trump. That was likely one of those: the economy, the border, other reasons. But again, thankfully, a majority of Americans woke up to the fact that they didn't like the direction the country was headed. And I do have a really encouraged and renewed faith in America. I've always said education is the key. Thomas Jefferson was famous for stating that a democracy requires an educated electorate. He's correct. And that's why I share so many of the things that I do that are things that are going on. Some of it's not pretty. Some of it's outright evil. But it does help you understand why things are the way they are. And often many of these things involve money, our economy, and how to navigate this stuff. The more you know, the more informed you are, the better decisions you can make. It's that simple. So our other big issue, of course, is because of excess spending on so many things, fraud, waste, money laundering, whatever it may be, the United States U.S. debt has now officially hit $36 trillion for the first time in history. Since the start of 2024, it actually has increased a whopping $2 trillion, which is the fastest and largest increase in history. We're increasing our debt by an average of $6.3 billion per day, which means the government now owes $108,000 of debt for every single American. That's man, woman, and child. We are absolutely in desperate need of a change. Elon Musk has said it. We are rapidly careening towards bankruptcy, particularly at this rate, which again continues to accelerate. If you look at a chart of the U.S. debt, it's just nuts. It's just going up almost in a straight line. The level of acceleration just keeps accelerating quicker. That's what happens when you get into what's a debt spiral, a death trap. The amount of interest continues to increase and increase, which builds upon the actual debt. In fact, currently, about 25% of all government revenues are now used just to pay interest on the debt. So only 75% of our tax revenue is actually going to pay for services, or obviously some of this is waste. I'm certainly hopeful and encouraged by Doge, Elon Musk, and Vivek Ramaswamy's effort that they're going to put in to reduce government waste and increase efficiency. It's a big job. It's a complicated job, but as Elon has stated himself, he thinks it's going to be one of the easiest jobs because the government is so wasteful and so much fraud is involved. There's huge opportunities to make big differences on cutting the debt. Part of the issue of the debt, of course, it's a national security issue. It does make our country weaker economically because so much of our income is going strictly to interest. It's breaking America's back and really gnawing at the freedoms that we have as a country. There's a saying in the Bible, it says the debtor is a slave to the lender. It's very accurate. The more that we owe, the more we become a slave to the debt. The higher cost of the debt, too, impacts interest rates, the cost of borrowing, and the cost of purchasing, particularly bigger ticket items, for the majority of Americans. As long as the government continues to have high levels of debt that's still currently increasing, the cost of servicing the debt will continue to impact or push interest rates, bond interest rates particularly higher, which means, again, it's going to just cost more for an average American to buy a home or a car in most cases. This will eat into the cost of housing and even things like groceries and those types of things. Now, Trump has discussed using tariffs for a couple of reasons. One of those is to use it as a bargaining chip. As he's often stated, the United States, we're still by far the largest economy in the world. We have the strongest economy, and we don't act like it. We give so many benefits in terms of tariffs, for example, to other countries. Much of that came from post-World War II, Europe and Japan offering tariffs to protect their industries or auto industries and various things so they could rebuild. Yet those tariffs have never changed. In fact, American-made automobiles in Europe have a 100% tariff. It's nearly impossible to sell a Ford or a Chevy in Europe because there's a 100% tariff. Europe doesn't have that in reverse. How is that fair? Balancing that out to some degree is, in my opinion, the right thing to do, and it will bring back more manufacturing back to the United States, more high-paid jobs. Yes, it will likely cause some items to increase in costs, but the overall economy will be stronger. More people will be making more money. Right now, the way it works is multinational global corporations benefit, but the average American typically doesn't in many ways. Yes, we get a cheaper cost of goods, things we purchase. Certainly increases profitability of companies. So from an investment standpoint, depending on what level of tariffs that Trump brings into play, that certainly could impact both of those things. And even Elon Musk has made some statements that there could be some economic rough patches, some bumps, but this is the right thing to do. A strong, healthy America, a strong middle class is actually, in the long run, you have to look at the bigger picture, is a better thing for the country rather than a middle class that's struggling. And you have the income disparity that we have where you have the middle class shrinking. That's a statistical fact. The rich continuing to get richer and the middle class continuing to struggle and shrinking. But I think the biggest short-term benefit of the tariffs, we're seeing that recently where Trump came out and stated that he's going to impose a 25% tariff on all goods from Mexico and Canada until they stop the illegal alien invasion from crossing out of their countries into ours, and the fentanyl and all the drugs crossing our borders. And interestingly, within 2 hours, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had an emergency meeting and was on the phone with Trump to try to work out a deal. Mexico, within the first day, the president of Mexico announced that they were stopping caravans coming through their country into ours. One day, folks. This is the difference of a politician whose interests oftentimes are not aligned with the average American. In other words, they're not representing Americans. They're not being representatives. They're actually representing the interests of their big money donors, which oftentimes are multinational global corporations that benefit from much of this immigration, illegal or otherwise, for cheap labor and all these kinds of things, yet it hurts Americans. Just shows you that if somebody stands up, and that's where I'm really excited. Now, will he actually impose 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico? I don't think he'll have to. have both shown immediately the buying power of our economy. These countries want access to our goods. And I remember another story he shared when he was in his first term, where France had imposed some significant tariffs on U.S. made goods. And Trump called the president of France and said, oh, fine, we'll just reciprocate with a 100% tariff on all French goods into the United States. And he was like, no, you can't do that. Well, within a day, they reversed it. There is power. There is a leverage. It's a tool that can be used to help the economic impact of our country. If used correctly, it could be tremendously beneficial for our country. Certainly, it has a downside. It could cause more inflation. It could cause some economic turmoil if tariffs are increased too much, and instead of countries deciding to work with us, they fight back and a tariff war occurs. There certainly is a risk to that. I'm not denying that fact. But we've been taken advantage of for so long by so many countries. We need to stand up for our own interests, and this is a way to do it. I think, in my opinion, is for the most part, I think Trump will be able to balance that line to use this as an economic tool, a hammer, if you will, a stick and a carrot, yet not damage our economy too much. In fact, it could likely really benefit our economy in the long run. It remains to be seen what's going to happen. Certainly there's uncertainty, and we'll just have to see what happens. Again, why diversification, protecting a portion of your portfolio just makes sense, so you're not at risk to a significant market correction if and when that does occur. Well, again, we'll see a correction at some point when that does occur, for whatever reason. Stay tuned in the next segment. I've got some more interesting stuff to share. I think you'll find it really some economic information I think you're going to find really beneficial.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you'll reach me. Again, it's yourpersonalbank.com. One last thought about this tariffs and such that I was discussing in the last segment. Certainly tariffs can be a great tool to use as a stick and carrot. We have the largest economy, so we have the power, so we should use that. Teddy Roosevelt always said, speak softly and carry a big stick. Tariffs can be operated that way. Also, things can get out of hand. You can trigger a tariff war, which could be negative, could have some negative impacts economically. There is some risk involved with that, some uncertainty, and there might be some bumps in the road along the way. I'm just going to encourage you to stay nimble, diversify, protect yourself, because we could see some real big swings or shifts potentially, depend on how this all plays out. Now, tariffs can also be a tremendous resource or source of income for the federal government, that if indeed DOGE is allowed, and we see a reduction of spending and an increase in efficiency with the government, we put the two together, we can see a tremendous boom in our economy that we haven't seen in decades. The other side of the coin, we trigger a tariff war and we continue the out of control spending. That can be a recipe for disaster. We could have a really big mess on our hands. Again, I'm optimistic. I'm upbeat. Not everyone is, but I'm pretty optimistic that it's going to work out. But again, I do believe there'll be some bumps in the road over the next year or two while this all plays out, obviously. Now, some other things. Oh, and that's why I like finishing up this thought. Again, the government has to be reined in. If we're going to use tariffs as an increased income source for the government, also at the same time, it needs to get more efficient for all this to work effectively. And as Milton Friedman, famous economist, would always say, the government must have only 4 functions: ensure national defense, protect citizens from violence and crime, establish rules defining private property ownership, and maintain a judicial system to enforce the rules. Anything else is unconstitutional and is out of the purview of the federal government. They have no constitutional right to be involved in that. So anything we do to reduce spending and increase efficiency, those four constitutional powers that the federal government has, if they would just focus on that and leave everything else, as it states in Article 10, everything else is reserved to the states or the people. If we got back to a truly constitutional form of government, again, we could see a tremendous economic boom. We do have a political opportunity here and an administration that seems to be willing and able to do much of this. There's already some pushback. Obviously, the Democrats are going to fight back. The rhinos are pushing back already. So we're going to see how far all this goes. It's going to be an interesting ride. But some other economic news that I think is very valuable and important to understand really what's going on out there is Americans now have $1.17 trillion in debt just in Visa and MasterCard, all-time records of credit card debt. It turns out that they are now charging people an average of 29% interest on that debt. Americans have their highest levels of debt, a lot because of inflation, the increased cost of goods. The interest rates have nearly doubled in the last 4 years. So it's like kicking a dog when it's down. The average American consumer is struggling to make ends meet. That's why you borrow money. A lot of these people are not doing this to buy frivolous things. Many of them are using their credit card debt to pay for food and housing and basic necessities. And interest rates have gone through nearly doubled on them at the same time. This is egregious. And Visa and MasterCard really dominate the market, and they are the most profitable companies I believe in the world at this point, certainly in the United States. They currently are running at about 50% profit margins, which are the highest profit margins of any company, publicly traded companies out there. Household debt overall has now also hit an all-time new record to nearly $18 trillion. The credit card debt alone, as I stated earlier, has increased by 8% for the average American household in just 1 year, which means most people are moving backwards. If you think about it, if you increase your income by 8% and you increase your debt, you're just breaking even. Inflation also is into play there, and it's at around 2-3%, according to the government numbers. Certainly, the real numbers are higher. That means unless someone's increased their income by at least 10-12% in the past year, they're falling behind. That's why we're seeing debt delinquency rates increase. Credit card delinquencies are on the rise, and the size of the bankruptcies are on the rise. These are all bad news for the economy. Auto loan balances, subprime delinquency rates, all of these things are on the rise significantly. The amount of auto loans has hit a new record of about 1.7 trillion. So again, we're seeing all-time record debt, and we're seeing increases in delinquencies. The typical American household, the typical American is on fumes, economically speaking. In fact, there was a survey done recently stating that over 20% of Americans are now delaying or skipping medical treatments and food meals just to pay their housing costs, mortgage or rent payments. If you think about this, about a quarter of Americans are skipping meals just so they can make their rent or home payment, just so they have a place to live. That's crazy. Some of them have been selling belongings. They've been doing all types of things to try to survive and make it. And the problem is continuing to be exacerbated as inflation continues to rise, granted at slower rates than it was before. But again, it's the cumulative impact of all of these increases that are really impacting folks that are struggling. And we're seeing, again, about 1 in 4 Americans are really struggling right now. On the other side of the coin, we've got a very bifurcated economy, I would say, because the stock market has been roaring to all-time highs. So those that are invested in the markets have been doing extraordinarily well if, and I repeat the if, if they were invested a significant portion of their portfolio in the high-flying tech stocks, or the Magnificent Seven, as many people call it. Often, many of those folks have seen 20% or more increases for the last 2 years in a row. I look at statements nearly every day, and it's amazing. I've gotten to the point now I look at the portfolio and what they're invested in. If they do not have a significant portion invested in tech stocks, the returns haven't been all that great. Truly, in the last 2 years, the returns that you've seen in the markets, the stock market in particular, have been much, really all wrapped up in how much of your portfolio has been allocated into the high-flying tech sector. And the real question then comes down to, after you've had back-to-back years with 20% plus increases, of which the vast majority came from one sector, one section, and most of that, about half, came from about 7 companies, the Magnificent Seven. What happens next? Statistics, history, charts, all of these things pretty much point to the same thing. When you have historical returns, particularly back-to-back years, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Blackrock analysts have all come out with similar reports stating that their predictions for the next 10 years, for the next decade in the stock market, is to see an average annual return of about 3 to 5%. Now, why are they saying this? They're using a lot of technical analysis, they're using a lot of history, but the main reasons they point to are quite simple. The markets have run up so far so fast, where can they go from here? That's one of their points. It's got to take a breather. It's not like it's going to just keep going up in a straight line. In fact, when you start thinking that it's never going to go down again, that's when, as Warren Buffett likes to say, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. He's right. But the other reason, as I stated earlier, that BlackRock and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs are referring to is because the concentration of just literally a few companies has driven majority of this upward gain. And as they have all stated the same thing, it's eerily similar to the dot-com bubble. And many of you are old enough to remember that. I was in the bit. I remember this myself. The dot-com bubble was fueled by one sector and a few companies, frankly, much like what we're seeing here. It was highly concentrated. And there was a lot of hype involved with the dot-com. There were companies trading for huge PE multiples. Everything was going to go into the internet, and it was the new thing, and there was a ton of hype, and all was coming from Silicon Valley and all that. Well, what are we hearing and seeing now? Same type of things, AI. It's all about AI, and I hear a ton of hype about this from Silicon Valley and all these things. And just like with the dot-com bubble, much of the promises and the hype didn't come about until many, many years later. We're seeing much of the same thing. Yes, I believe in the long run, AI will have a significant impact, much like the internet has had a significant impact on our lives and our economy. But much of what's being hyped now will not come about for many, many years. And as these analysts are stating, one of the biggest reasons is the amount of energy that AI will require to do some of the things that they're promising or hyping. We don't have the capability of generating yet. And it's going to take several years to just build the infrastructure to generate the energy needed to run the AI to accomplish the hype that they're pushing. So unfortunately, I hate to be a wet blanket, but much of what we're hearing, much of this hype, yes, eventually will come about, but probably not for many years longer than what many people think. And once that kind of gets into that becomes general accepted knowledge. I don't know if we're there yet. I think it's getting there. I'm seeing far, far more negative projections and about corrections and all these types of things. I've seen a significant shift. I pay attention to this stuff every week. I'm seeing a significant shift in negative projections and articles about the markets. Like this one study stating that they predict now the recession odds now surge to 75%. Okay. We'll discuss this more in the last segment. But I'm seeing far, far more negative than positive articles now. Negative projections versus positive. And to some respect, it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, I've been on this rodeo before. I've seen this before. And yes, this run up has been incredible. It's gone far longer than most people thought. But that's another common saying about the markets. They can be irrational longer than you can be solvent. Don't get caught up in all the hype. I know it's been tremendous. If you were invested, it was tremendous. And as this other article states, probably not probably not a good time to get in. A lot of people are thinking they're those that didn't get to ride this up, frustrated because they missed it. They're wanting to get in. Probably not the best time to get in now, as this other article states. But if you have done well, it might be a good time to protect some of those winnings, cash in some of those chips, and protect some of the upside. I'm not saying get out completely, but at least protect a portion of it so that if it does continue, you can still take advantage. But if it does retreat or correct, you get to lock in some of those gains. Stay tuned in the last segment. We got some more great information I think you'll find very valuable, so don't miss it.
Stay tuned for more common sense from Ference. For more information, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show with Ference Toth. Want more information? Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. Now back to the show with Ference Toth.
Welcome back to the Your Personal Bank Show. This is Ference. If you want to reach me, you can do so at yourpersonalbank.com. Yes, you'll reach me. Again, it's yourpersonalbank.com. As this Motley Fool article just states, the stock market has just crossed a threshold that's never reached before, and history is quite clear what happens next. And that threshold is what's known as the Buffett Indicator. It's hit an all-time high. A couple of weeks ago, I did a show titled, Does Warren Buffett Know Something We Don't? He sold more stock this year than any point in his career. Last quarter, Warren Buffett did not buy a single dime of stock. I don't know if he's ever done that for an entire quarter in his career. And he's sitting on more money, cash, than at any point in his career, both in total dollars and percentage-wise. Motley Fool article states, we have a number of events that foreshadow trouble for the U.S. economy and Wall Street. We have the longest yield curve inversion in history, a historically high price-to-earnings ratio, and the first meaningful drop in U.S. M2 money supply since the Great Depression. And as they state here, perhaps nothing screams pay attention more than the long-term valuation metric that's known as the Buffett Indicator. And that's where you take the total market cap to GDP, and it's probably the best single measure of where valuations stand at any given moment, and it is at the all-time high. As this article states, each point it's gone to this point where it's hit a high point. The following year or two has been a real struggle for the stock market. And this goes back to 1970. So again, the Buffett Indicator surpassed 200% for the first time in history. I shared this story several times, but it's human nature is so difficult that when things have gone so well for so long, it's hard to change gears. But that's what the wise investor does. It's an emotional decision. As one of the people I talked to, she was saying, she was giddy with excitement because the returns have been so great over the last couple of years. And as I reminded her, and as Warren Buffett famously always says, that's when you want to be fearful. Be fearful when others are greedy. The odds of recession have increased now from coming up in the next year to over 75%. The CNBC article states corporate insiders are selling shares at a record pace in the fourth quarter of 2024. We have three of the biggest analysts, Blackrock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs, all stating the same thing, that this market reminds them of the dot-com bubble. Reuters is even coming out saying warning of a bubble in AI stocks as funds are depleting their cash buffers, trying to ride this up. This is when you, again, want to be the most fearful, most concerned. When will this end? No one knows. Market Watch article here states investors should start diversifying their portfolio, according to Goldman Sachs. Your personal bank and annuities can be great tools for that. If you want to remain highly liquid, your personal bank can be a great tool to earn 6% insured, guaranteed, tax-free, and highly liquid while you wait for that correction and the next opportunity. Or if you just want to cash in some of those chips and lock in gains safely, annuities, best time in 42 years for both of those products. Other articles on here are even stating openly now fixed interest assets is where you want to be, particularly to a point where we've seen tremendous run up in the stock market. They even point out a couple of the reasons why getting into dividend and fixed income assets like annuities in your personal bank can make so much sense. As Goldman Sachs states, 2025 is going to be a great year because the bond interest rates will stay strong. In fact, when the Fed cuts rates, bond market is where investors should want to be. That's their statement. I've seen other articles talking about this will be the golden age of fixed income assets. If Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Blackrock, and others are correct, and the stock market does indeed average 3 to 5% average annual return for the next decade, that could easily happen, especially if you throw in a correction in there or two. Let's assume that turns out to be the case, that they're accurate. And you could have got 6% tax-free guaranteed, and it's increasing. So your personal bank dividends historically have averaged around 7%. The last several decades, we're on the low end of that, moving up. So if you're making 6 to 7%, let's say, in the next decade, tax-free, that's equivalent for most people to a 7 to 9% return or more after tax, without any risk and without any income tax. My gosh, you might kick yourself because you didn't consider it sooner. And here's another reason I think is very valuable, and I hadn't thought about this until I read this article. It's MarketWatch. Seniors own 79% of stocks and equity funds, and why that's good for fixed assets. Well, as people age, they tend to move into safer assets like bonds, annuities, your personal bank, fixed assets, even CDs, whatever. As more people age, and we've got a huge baby boomer group, aging and retiring as we speak, they own the majority of these stocks and assets. As they move more to these fixed assets, that's going to put more and more pressure, downward pressure, or less growth in the stock markets. So it's a demographic reason. So we've got market reasons going on. We've got a number of bond interest rates. We've talked about this on the show so many times. Bond interest rates likely stay strong for the next 3 to 5 years, if not longer. Vanguard's predicting for the next decade, frankly. And that's because of the level of debt that our federal government has. As long as until they start really paying down that debt significantly, we're going to see upward pressure on bond returns, bond interest, which means dividends, and insurance companies and annuities are going to stay strong. They're at the best point they've been in 42 years. It's only going to get better. So we're in a increasing asset environment where there's some uncertainty, again, bullish about the future, but there's certainly likely going to be some bumps in the road, tariff fights potentially, and various changes that are going to occur. It's going to create some economic speed bumps, some challenges. We've seen a significant run up in both the stock and real estate markets to where they become almost unaffordable for the typical person to even consider getting into at this point. So many people are waiting by the sidelines that haven't already been invested, waiting for that correction to occur. You could do that too. You could cash in your chips if you benefited, or if you missed out on this and you want to invest. A lot of people are putting their money in the personal bank to grow 6% tax-free, guaranteed, and highly liquid. And what if it takes a year or two for the next correction to occur, and then maybe hit some kind of bottom and start to get better, and that might be a good time to get back into the game, if you know what I'm saying, if you're so inclined. In the meantime, your money's safe, it's growing, it's earning, and you have the ability to pull the trigger whenever it makes sense. I just firmly believe we're going to see that type of thing. We're seeing a change in administration. We're going to see significant changes that are economic policies and things like that are going to have dramatic impacts, and deporting literally likely millions of people out of this country. It's going to have economic impacts in a lot of ways that I don't even think a lot of people are even really thinking about or considering or realize how significant some of these changes could be. There's so many changes occur, it's going to cause some volatility. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, particularly likely over the next year or two. We saw this when Reagan took over from the Carter administration. We also have the problem of the massive debt that's continuing to increase, which gives us a nice opportunity when it comes to bond interest rates, and you can take advantage of that with annuities and high cash value policies to get a greater return. And positive arbitrage is moving back in our favor now. So not only will you be able to access your money when you want to, insured, tax-free, but you likely can benefit when you access that money. That's the power of the personal bank. If you're earning as much or more in dividends, then you get charged interest when you access the funds. You still get to keep the difference. In other words, you still get a benefit on monies that you spent. That's truly the power of your personal bank. So I know we're getting close to the end of the year, and if you want to do any end of year tax planning or that type of thing, I really encourage you to contact me quickly so we can address that. But I just want you to think about changing your focus on what has worked in the past is likely not going to work in the future. I've stated this for a while, but now we're getting right to the point of where those changes are going to start coming swift and fast and furious. And it's going to have an impact. Reducing your risk, diversifying, creating a tax-free bucket of money, highly liquid, the ability to access to re-engage if you're so inclined, or use the money for any other purpose for that matter if you need it. Still get some benefit from it. In other words, you can still keep the difference of the dividend you're getting paid versus the interest it costs you, because Federal Reserve's likely, they're talking about in the spring, reducing rates further, getting into a stronger and stronger position over the next few years of where your dividends are increasing, your cost of borrowing is decreasing, you're keeping a higher and higher percentage of the money that you might have used and spent for other purposes. Think about that. Where else can you earn interest on money you spent? Your personal bank allows you to do that. That's the power. That's the difference. That's the unique aspect of it, and why I share this on the radio show. Enjoy this holiday season. We've had a rough ride the last 3 or 4 years, economically speaking. We've got some volatility ahead, but I do believe it'll get better. But protecting yourself in the meantime, I think, is extremely valuable. As always, stay tuned to the Your Personal Bank Show, and as long as it's on our money, in God we trust.
Listen Tuesdays at noon and Saturdays at 1 to the Your Personal Bank Show for more information. Contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. That's 866-268-4422. This show is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information. The presenter and guests of this program do not engage in legal, accounting, or tax advice. Professional advice regarding your situation should be sought if required. Some products discussed may have limitations and not be available in all states. Excessive unpaid loans may affect performance. Distributions may become taxable if not managed properly. Replacements may not be suitable for everyone. There may be charges when replacing coverage. Dividend rates and bank line of credit rates may change. For current rates, contact Ference at 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com. Again, that's 866-268-4422 or yourpersonalbank.com.